5 degrees, Cancer, 32 minutes, 17.7 seconds. 13 degrees, Virgo, 57 minutes, 27, 28, 29, 30.4 seconds. Dies Veneris, the time of Venus, VDI, the year 116 after Cairo. This is the story of Edward Alexander Crowley and Rose Kelly. 26 June 2020, 12:02 GMT -5. The Sun and Mercury are in Cancer. Saturn is in Aquarius. And Mars is somewhere between Aries and Pisces. We returned to the plaza and walked toward the church. I saw the well in the lamplight, with the bottle of wine and 2 glasses on its wall. A couple of sweethearts must have been there. A couple of sweethearts must have been here, I think. Silent, allowing their hearts to speak to each other. And after their hearts had said all they had to say, they began to share the great mysteries. I felt that I was facing something quite serious, and that I needed to learn everything I could from my experience. For a few moments, I thought about my studies, about Vedagotha, and about the man I was hoping to find in my life. But all that seemed far away, clouded by the mists over Saint-Severin. Why did you tell me the story of Bernadette? I asked. I don't know why exactly, he answered without looking at me directly. Maybe because we're not far from woods. Maybe because the day after tomorrow is the day of the Immaculate Conception. Or maybe it was because I wanted to show you that my world is not so solitary and mad as it may appear. There are others who are part of that world, and they believe in what they say. I never said that your world is mad. Maybe it's mine that's crazy. I mean, here I am, spending the most crucial time of my life concentrating on textbooks and courses that won't help me at all to escape from the place I already know too well. I sensed that he was relieved that I understood him. I expected him to say something more about the goddess. But instead he turned to me and said, "Let's get some sleep. We've had a lot to drink." Tuesday, December 7th, 1993. He went straight to sleep. But I was awake for a long time, thinking about the fog, the wine, and our conversation. I read the manuscript he gave me, and what was in it thrilled me. God, if God really existed, was both father and mother, yang and yin. Later, I turned out the light and lay there thinking. When we were quiet with each other, I was able to see how close I felt to him. Neither of us had said anything. Love doesn't need to be discussed. It has its own voice and speaks for itself. That night by the well, the silence had allowed our hearts to approach each other and to get to know each other better. My heart had listened closely to what his had said, and now it was content. Before I fell asleep, I decided I would do what he called the exercise of the other. I am here in this room, I thought, far from everything familiar to me, talking about things that have never interested me, and sleeping in a city where I've never set foot before. I can pretend, I can pretend, at least for a few minutes, that I am different. I began to imagine how I would like to be living right at that moment. I wanted to be happy, curious, joyful, living every moment intensely, drinking the water of life thirstily, believing again in my dreams, able to fight for what I wanted, loving a man who loved me. Yes, that was the woman I wanted to be, the woman who was suddenly presenting herself and becoming me. I felt that my soul was bathed in the light of a god, or of a goddess, in whom I had lost faith. And I felt that at that moment the other left my body and was standing in the corner of that small room. I observed the woman I had been up I observed the woman I had been up until then, weak but trying to give the impression of strength, fearful of everything but telling herself it wasn't fear. It was the wisdom of someone who knew what reality was, putting up shutters in front of windows to keep the joy of the sun from entering, just so the sun's rays wouldn't fade my old furniture. I looked at the other, there in the corner of the room, fragile, exhausted, disillusioned. Controlling and enslaving what should really be free, her emotions, trying to judge her future loves by the rules of her past suffering. But love is always new. Regardless of whether we love once, twice, or a dozen times in our life, we always face a brand new situation. Love can consign us to hell or to paradise, but it always takes us somewhere. We simply have to accept it because it is what nourishes our existence. If we reject it, we die of hunger because we lack the courage to stretch out a hand and pluck the fruits from the branches of the tree of life. We have to take love where we find it, even if it means hours, days, weeks of disappointment and sadness. The moment we begin to seek love, love begins to seek us and to save us. When the other left me, my heart once again began to speak to me. It told me that the breach in the dike had allowed the water to pour through. It told me the breach in the dike had allowed the waters to pour through. That the wind was blowing in all directions at once, and that it was happy because I was once again willing to listen to what it had to say. My heart told me that I was in love, and I fell asleep with a smile on my lips. When I awoke, the window was open, and he was gazing at the mountains in the distance. I watched him without saying anything, ready to close my eyes if he turned toward me. As if he knew, he turned and looked at me. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." "Close the window. It's so cold." The other had appeared with no warning. It was still trying to change the direction of the wind, to detect shortcomings, to say, no, that's impossible. But it knew it was too late. I have to get dressed, I said. I'll wait for you downstairs. I got up, banished the other Apo Partos Kakademanos from my thoughts, opened the window again and let the sun in. Its light bathed everything. The mountains with their snow-covered peaks, the ground blanketed in dry leaves, and the river which I could hear but not see. The sun shone on me, warming my nude body. I was no longer cold. I was consumed by a heat, the heat of a spark becoming a flame, the flame becoming a bonfire, the bonfire becoming an inferno. I knew. I wanted this. I also knew that from this moment on, I was going to experience heaven and hell, joy and pain, dreams and hopelessness, that I would no longer be capable of containing the winds that blew from the hidden corners of my soul. I knew that from this moment on, love would be my guide, and that it had waited to lead me ever since childhood, when I had felt love for the first time. Ruth. The truth is, I had never forgotten love, even when it had deemed me unworthy of fighting for it. But love had been difficult, and I had been reluctant to cross its frontiers. I recalled the Platha in Soria, and the moment when I had asked him to find the medal I lost. I had known what he was going to tell me, and I hadn't wanted to hear it, because he was the type who would someday go off in search of wealth, adventure, and dreams. I needed a love that was possible. I realized that I had known nothing of love before when I saw him at the conference and accepted his invitation. I'd thought that I, a mature woman, would be able to control the heart of the girl who had been looking for so long for her prince. That he had spoken about the child in all of us, and I'd heard again the voice of the child I had been, of the princess who was fearful of loving and losing. For 4 days, I had tried to ignore my heart's voice, but it had grown louder and louder, and the other had become desperate. In the furthest corner of my soul, my true self still existed, and I still believed in my dreams. Before the other could say a word, I had accepted the ride with him. I had accepted the invitation to travel with him and to take the risk involved. And because of that small part of me that had survived, love had finally found me after it had looked for me everywhere. Love had found me, despite the barricade that the other had built across a quiet street in Zaragoza. A barricade of preconceived ideas, stubborn opinions, and textbooks. I opened the window and my heart. The sun flooded the room, and love inundated my soul. Or inundated my soul. We wandered for hours through the snow and along the roads. We breakfasted in a village whose name I never found out, but in whose central plaza a dramatic fountain sculpture displayed a serpent and a dove, combined in a single fabulous creature, not unlike the eagle and serpent of Inky. Tenochtitlan in Mexico. He smiled when he saw it. It's a sign, masculine and feminine joined in a single figure. I'd never thought before about what you told me yesterday, I said, but it makes sense. And God created man and woman. He quoted from Genesis because that was his image and simulacrum. Man and woman. Simulation. I noted a new gleam in his eye. He was happy and laughed at every silly thing. He fell into easy conversation with the few people we met along the way. Workers dressed in gray on their way to the fields, adventurers in colorful gear preparing to climb a mountain peak. I said little. My French is awful. But my soul rejoiced at seeing him this way. His joy made everyone who spoke with him smile. Perhaps his heart had spoken to him, and now knew that I loved him, even though I was still behaving like just an old friend. You seem happier, I said at one point, because I've always dreamed of being here with you, walking through these mountains and harvesting the golden fruits of the sun. The golden fruits of the sun, a verse written ages ago, repeated by him now at just the right moment. There's another reason you're happy, I said, as we left the small village with the strange statue. What's that? You know that I'm happy. You're responsible for my being happy today, climbing the mountains of truth, far from my mountains of notebooks and texts. You're making me happy. And happiness is something that multiplies when it is divided. Did you do the exercise of the other? Yes. How did you know? Because you've changed too. And because we always learn that exercise, self-auditing, at the right time. L. Ron Hubbard. The other pursued me all through the morning, every minute, though its voice grew fainter and its image seemed to dissolve. It reminded me of those vampire films where the monster crumbles into dust. We passed another column with an image of the Virgin on the cross. What are you thinking about, he asked me, about vampires. Those creatures of the night locked inside themselves, desperately seeking company. Incapable of loving? That's why legend has it that only a stake through the heart can kill them. When that happens, the heart bursts, freeing the energy of love and destroying the evil. Awful. I never thought of that before, but it makes sense. I had succeeded in burying the state. My heart, freed of all its courses, was aware of everything. The other no longer had a place to call its own. 1,000 times I wanted to take his hand. and 1,000 times I stopped myself. I was still confused. I wanted to tell him I loved him, but I didn't know how to begin. We talked about the mountains and the rivers. We were lost in a forest for almost an hour, but eventually we found the path again. We ate sandwiches and drank melted snow. When the sun began to set, we decided to return to Saint-Savin. The sound of our footsteps echoed from the stone walls. At the entrance to the church, I instinctively dipped my hand in the font of holy water and made the sign of the cross. I recalled that water was a symbol of the goddess. "Let's go in," he suggested. We walked through the dark, empty building. Saint-Savin, a hermit who had lived at the start of the first millennium, was buried below the main altar. The walls of the place were crumbling and had clearly been reconstructed several times. Some places are like that. They can suffer through wars, persecutions, and indifference, but they still remain sacred. Finally, someone comes along, senses that something is missing, and rebuilds them. I noticed an image of the crucified Christ that gave me a funny feeling. I had the impression that his head was moving, following me, like one of those deer pictures you see in the tortilleria. Let's stop here. We were before an altar of Our Lady, even Guan Yu. Look at that image. Mary with her son in her lap, the infant, la infant, Aisu, pointing to the heavens. "Look more carefully," he said. I studied the details of the wooden carving, the gilt paint, the pedestal. Sur Arsh. The perfection with which the artist had traced the folds of the robe. But it was when I focused on the finger of the child Jesus that I understood what he meant. Although Mary held him in her arms, it was Jesus who was supporting her. The child's arm, raised to the sky, appeared to be lifting the Virgin toward heaven, back to the place of her groom's abode. The artist who created this more than 600 years ago knew what he wanted to convey, he commented. Footsteps sounded on the wooden floor. A woman entered and lit a candle in front of the main altar. We remained silent for a while, respecting her moment of prayer. Love never comes just a little at a time, I thought, as I watched him, absorbed in contemplation of the Virgin. The previous day, the world had made sense, even without love's presence. But now we need each other in order to see the true brilliance of things. When the woman had gone, he spoke again. The artist knew the Great Mother, the goddess, and the sympathetic face of God. You've asked me a question that up until now I haven't been able to answer directly. It was, where did you learn all this? Yes, I had asked him that, and he had already answered me, but I didn't say so. Well, I learned in the same way that this artist did. I accepted love from on high. I allowed myself to be guided. He went on. You must remember the letter I wrote you when I spoke of wanting to enter a monastery. I never told you, but I did, in fact, do that. I immediately remembered the conversation we had before the conference in Bilbao. My heart began to beat faster, and I tried to fix my gaze on the Virgin. She was smiling. It can't be, I thought. You entered, and then you left. Please tell me that you left the monastery. I had already lived some pretty wild years, he said, not guessing my thoughts this time. I got to see other peoples and other lands. I had already looked for God in the four corners of the earth. I had fallen in love with other women and worked in a number of different jobs. Another stab. Now, therefore, I am known to ye by my name, Nuit, and to him by a secret name which I will give him when at last he knoweth me, since I am infinite space and the infinite stars thereof. Do ye also thus. Bind nothing. Let there be no difference made among you between any one thing and any other thing, for thereby there cometh hurt. I would have to be careful that the other didn't return. I kept my gaze on the Virgin's smile. The mysteries of life fascinated me. I wanted to understand them better. I looked for signs that would tell me that someone knew something. I went to India and to Egypt. I sat with masters of magic and meditation. And finally, I discovered what I was looking for. That truth resides where there is faith. Truth resides where there is faith. I looked around again at the interior of the church. The worn stones, fallen and replaced so many times. What had made human beings so insistent? What had caused them to work so hard at rebuilding this small temple in such a remote spot, hidden in the mountains? Faith. The Buddhists were right. The Hindus were right. The Muslims were right. And so were the Jews. Whenever someone follows the path to faith, sincerely follows it, he or she is able to unite with God and to perform miracles. But it wasn't enough simply to know that. You have to make a choice. I choose the Catholic Church because I was raised in it. I chose the Catholic Church because I was raised in it, and my childhood had been impregnated with its mysteries. If I had been born Jewish, I would have chosen Judaism. God is the same, even though He has 1,000 names. It is up to us to select a name for Him. Once again, steps sounded in the church. A man approached and stared at us. Then he turned to the center altar and reached for the two candelabra. He must have been the one responsible for guarding the church. I remember the watchman at the other chapel, the man who wouldn't allow us to enter, but this man said nothing. I have a meeting tonight, he said when the man left. Please, go on with what you were saying. Don't change the subject. I entered a monastery close to here. For 4 years, I studied everything I could. During that time, I made contact with the Clarifieds and the Charismatics, the sects that have been trying to open doors that have been closed for so long to certain spiritual experiences. I discovered that God was not the ogre that had frightened me as a child. There was a movement afoot for a return to the original innocence of Christianity. You mean that after 2,000 years, they finally understood that it was time to allow Jesus to become part of the church? I said with some sarcasm. You may think you're joking, but that's exactly what it... You may think you're joking, but that was exactly it. I began to study with one of the superiors at the monastery. He taught me that we have to accept the fire of revelation, the Holy Spirit. The Virgin continued to smile, and the infant Jesus kept his joyful expression. La enfant sourire. But my heart stopped when he said that. I too had believed in that once, but time, age, and the feeling that I was logical and practical, that I was a logical and practical person, had distanced me from religion. I realized how much I wanted to recover my childhood faith when I had believed in angels and miracles, but I couldn't possibly bring it back simply through an act of will. The superior told me that if I believed that I knew, that I would in fact eventually know, he continued. I began to talk to myself when I was in my cell. I prayed that the Holy Spirit would manifest itself and teach me what I needed to know. Little by little, I discovered that as I talked to myself, a wiser voice was saying things for me. That's happened to me too, I interrupted him. He waited for me to go on, but I couldn't say anything else. I'm listening, he said. Something had stopped my tongue. He was speaking so beautifully, and I couldn't express myself nearly as well. The other wants to come back, he said, as if he had guessed that what I was thinking. The other is always afraid of saying something that might sound silly. Yes, I said, struggling to overcome my fear. Okay. Sometimes when I'm talking with someone and get excited about what I'm saying, I find myself saying things I've never said before. It seems almost as if I'm channeling an intelligence that isn't mine, one that understands life much better than me. But this is rare. In most conversations, I prefer to listen. I always feel as if I'm learning something new, even though I wind up forgetting it all. We are our own greatest surprise, he said. Faith as tiny as a grain of sand allows us to move mountains. That's what I've learned. And now my own words sometimes surprise me. The apostles were fishermen, illiterate and ignorant, but they accepted the flame that fell from the heavens. They were not ashamed of their own ignorance. They had faith in the Holy Spirit. That's what I've learned, and now my own words sometimes surprise me. The apostles were fishermen, illiterate and ignorant, but they accepted the flame that fell from the heavens. They were not ashamed of their own ignorance. They had faith in the Holy Spirit. This gift is there for anyone who will accept it. One has only to believe, accept, and be willing to make mistakes. The virgin smiled down on me. She had every reason to cry, but she was joyful. Go on. That's all, he answered. Accept the gift. And then the gift manifests itself. It doesn't work that way. Didn't you understand me? I understand, but I'm like everyone else. I'm scared. It might work for you or for my neighbor, but never for me. That will change one day when you begin to see that we are really just like that child there. But until then, we'll all go on thinking we've come close to the light, when actually we can't even light our own flame. He didn't answer. You didn't finish your story about the seminary, I said. I'm still there. Before I could react, he stood up and walked to the center of the church. I stayed where I was. My head was spinning. Still in the seminary? Better not to think about it. Love had flooded my soul, and there was no way I could control it. There was only one recourse, the other, with whom I had been harsh because I was weak, and cold because I was afraid, but I no longer wanted the other. I could no longer look at my life through its eyes. A sharp, sustained sound like that of an immense flute interrupted my thoughts. My heart jumped. The sound came again, and again I looked behind me and saw a wooden staircase that led up to a crude platform, which didn't seem to fit with the frozen beauty of the church. On the platform was an ancient organ. And there he was. I couldn't see his face because the lighting was bad, but I knew he was up there. I stood up and he called to me. Pilar, Kutuba, he said, his voice full of emotion. Stay where you are. I obeyed. May the Great Mother inspire me, he said. May this music be my prayer for the day. And he began to play the Ave Maria. It must have been about 6 in the evening, time for the Angelus, a time when light and darkness merge. The sound of the organ echoed through the empty church, blending in my mind with the stones and the images laden with history and with faith. I closed my eyes and let the music flow through me, cleansing my soul of all fear and sin and reminding me that I am always better than I think and stronger than I believe. For the first time since I had abandoned the path of faith, I felt a strong desire to pray. Although I was seated in a pew, my soul was kneeling at the feet of the lady before me, the woman who had said yes, when she could have said no. The angel would have sought out someone else, and there would have been no sin in the eyes of the Lord, because God knows his children's weakness. But she had said, "Thy will be done." The Limet. Even though she sensed that she was receiving, along with the words of the angel, all the pain and suffering of her destiny, even though her heart's eyes could see her beloved son leaving the house, could see the people who would follow him and then deny him. But thy will be done, the limit. And even when, at the most sacred moment in a woman's life, she had to lie down with the animals in a stable to give birth, because that was what the scriptures, the law required. Thy will be done, in even when in agony, she said, Would that I had been a thing not created. She looked through the streets for her son and found him at the temple. And he asked that she not interfere because he had other obligations and tasks to perform. Thy will be done. Even when she knew that she would search for him for the rest of her days, her heart filled with pain, fearing every moment for his life, knowing that he was being persecuted and threatened. Thy will be done, even when, finding him in the crowd, she was unable to draw near him. Thy will be done, even when she asked someone to tell him that she was there, and the son sent back the response, My mother and my brothers are those who are here with me. Thy will be done, even when at the end, after everyone had fled, only she, another woman, and one of them stood at the foot of the cross, bearing the laughter of his enemies and the cowardice of his friends. Thy will be done. Thy will be done, my Lord, because you know the weakness in the heart of your children, and you assign each of them only the burden they can bear. May you understand my love, because it is the only thing I have that is really mine, the only thing that I will be able to take with me into the next life. Please allow it to be courageous and pure. Please make it capable of surviving the snares of the world. The organ stopped, and the sun went into hiding behind the mountains, as if both were ruled by the same hand. The music had been his prayer, and the prayer had been heard. I opened my eyes and found the church in complete darkness except for the solitary candle that illuminated the image of the Virgin. I heard his footsteps again returning to where I sat. The light of that single candle gleamed on my tears and my smile, a smile that wasn't perhaps as beautiful as the Virgin's, showed that my heart was alive. He looked at me, and I at him. My hand reached out for his and found it. Now it was his heart that was beating faster. I could almost hear it in the silence. But my soul was serene, and my heart at peace. I held his hand and he embraced me. We stood there at the feet of the Virgin for I don't know how long. Time had stopped. She looked down at us, the adolescent girl who had said yes to her destiny, the woman who had agreed to carry the Son of God in her womb, the love of God in her heart. She understood. I didn't want to ask for anything. That afternoon in the church had made the entire journey worthwhile. Those 4 days with him had made up for an entire year in which so little had happened. We left the church hand in hand and walked back toward our room. My head was spinning. Seminary, Great Mother, the meeting we had later that night. I realized then that we both wanted to unite our souls under one destiny, but the seminary and Zaragoza stood in the way. My heart felt squeezed. I looked around at the medieval homes and the well where we had sat the previous night. I recalled the silence and the sadness of the other, the woman I had once been. God, I am trying to recover my faith. Please don't abandon me in the middle of this adventure. I prayed, pushing my fears aside.
Jupiter